Good afternoon. Welcome to the Executive Edge podcast. I have the pleasure of having Cory Oliver and Jason Flanzbaum from Boca Bearings with me today. Really excited to have you guys on the podcast today.
Thank you for
Thanks
having
for
us.
inviting us.
Yeah, very much enjoy it. Jason, why don't we start with just giving us a little high-level overview of the organization. I know you're a second-generation owner, and walk us through a little bit of the highlights, the details of the business, how you've grown, and how the transition has been from, was it your father that was the original owner?
Still is my father.
Okay.
So the story as I tell it, the mythology is that my father started the business out of my bedroom when I was a kid here in Boca Raton. I would get up in the morning and head off to school, and he would come up the stairs and sit down at the desk that I would then do homework at later on in the evening and launch the business. And he really started the business focused on a certain product line that was miniature in size for the industrial segment of ball bearings. And it really allowed him to build a business that wasn't dependent upon local business like most bearing distribution is. It was really nationwide and worldwide because the product was small enough that it's easy to ship. It's easy to ship quickly. It's not containers or even pallets full of product, envelopes. And, a box this size could fit tens of thousands of bearings inside it, depending upon the size range. So he was capable of starting a business, like I said, essentially out of a house, and he had like a hobby case that had 64 drawers in it, and that would be stocked full of product. And at night, I would come home from school and sit in front of the TV and build kits for customers. And on the weekends, him and myself and his second wife at the time would sit, and we would somebody would fold the piece of paper and someone would stuff the envelope and someone would lick it closed and put a stamp on it. And we would do marketing, and so, I grew up watching him build the business from that type of operation to where we are now, which is 30,000 square feet, $8 million in sales and 25 employees with an office in Shanghai, an inspection house in Pudong. We have people working for us out of Colombia and Thailand, and we're a grown-up business. It's been a pleasure watching that happen. The business is now 37 years old. I've been here the last 21 years, and in that time, the business has doubled. Probably, I think that's about roughly what's gone on in that timeline. Our real differentiator as far as bearings go, because there are a lot of bearing companies and those are mostly distribution. We are a specialty house. We specialize, like I said, in miniature, but in specialty materials, mainly ceramic, stainless steel, and other exotic materials, or even builds or sizes. And that's what makes us different, is the majority of distributors out there are really dealing in the kind of inventories that they can turn 5 times plus a year. And we turn our inventory once, probably every 5 years. So it's definitely a different business model, but people know of us because of that kind of feature. And they come to us, the distributors included, because they know it's on the shelf, it's here, and we can ship it very quickly.
So access to the product is a major differentiator. Are you doing business all over the world, or is it mostly U.S.?
We do business all over the world. Again, most times the majority of our business is here in the U.S. Crossing borders, duties, and import costs and exchange rates make it so that most bearings are consumed within at least here from this country or Canada.
And what was your dad's background before he started this business, or what was he doing, and how did he stumble across this? Was this off the side of his desk project that became a business?
No, he came from another bearing company. So at some point when he was young, he had gotten an opportunity to work in the bookkeeping department and worked his way up in an organization that was during the 70s, where the great race to miniaturization of a lot of devices was happening in electronics. And as things got smaller, Japan and Germany and some of those areas started really becoming, I guess, the leaders in this technology, miniature precision bearings, high precision, high speed, but small. And he was given the directive at his company to essentially build a mail order business where it didn't exist before. And he was, again, most bearings are consumed locally because they tend to be very large. It's for every market's got a concrete operation. Every market's got, around here, they've got a port. Every market has these large bearings that are required on a day-to-day basis. When something breaks, you need it right away. You can't wait for it to be shipped to you. Well, miniature bearings didn't have that same kind of problem. So he was capable of building a mail order business for this other company and then quickly realized he could really do it for himself.
Very interesting story, and 37 years. Congratulations on such great growth.
Thank you.
Cory, let me turn it over to you. I know how long have you been with the organization for?
I've been with Boca Bearings for 11 years.
Great.
I
And tell
came
me what
in,
your trajectory is during that
sure.
11-year period.
So it actually starts even before that. So I grew up in Boca Raton, went off to school at the University of Florida in Gainesville. And when I came back, looking for that job, right in the middle of the economic collapse in the 2010s, 2009, 2010, looking for jobs. And I found a listing for Boca Bearings that was looking for a sales and marketing role with fishing experience. I didn't have a lot of experience coming out of college. I'd had one social media job in the early days of Facebook that I worked during the summers, but I saw this listing, and my father actually is a professional fisherman. He sells live bait, out of South Florida, and so I was like, oh, looking for marketing, fishing. I have some experience. So I interviewed actually with Jason. And I think the next day after that initial interview, I ended up getting an offer down in Miami for another full-time role that was suited to what I was looking for. So I lived in Miami for 2.5 years. I decided I wanted to go back closer to home. I came to Boca, and what do I see on LinkedIn? But Boca Bearings hiring this time for a social media and marketing coordinator role. And that was perfectly within my wheelhouse. I had 2.5 years of experience doing that sort of work at another organization. So I found Jason's old contact information and called him up and said, hey, you probably don't remember me. We had one interview, but I'm in the area again and I'm interested and I think I'd be a good fit. And that was how I started.
Now, walk me through what type of roles you went through and your current role and how you contribute to the organization now.
Sure. So it started as a pretty traditional marketing coordinator role. At the time, I don't even know if we were calling it that, but doing support on email marketing, direct mail marketing, social media management. And I shared the office with Jason because at the time he was heading sales and marketing in the organization and he needed help on the marketing front. And so I literally sat, right across the room from him. And from that, I learned a lot because I heard him on calls with customers. I heard him interacting with the sales team. I heard him interacting with our technology partners as he built out, parts of the website and our company ERP system. And I just kind of absorbed all of that information as I sat in that office. And then the joke I tell at least is whenever something would go wrong at the office, a piece of technology breaks, people just walked into that office and said, "Hey, Jay, this is broken." And then Jay would go on vacation and they would still walk into that same office and say, "Hey, this is broken." And I was like, okay, well, I know to call this guy when this thing goes wrong. And I hear Jason have these conversations for this thing. And so that's kind of how I started to move into more of a operational and a manager role. And then as the company got into the EOS model, I was, positioned to then become head of marketing and sit on the executive team. And from there, as I grew and learned more of the technology side of the organization, I ended up moving up into the operations role to be the integrator. So that's kind of been my track here.
And how long have you been in that integrator role?
That's probably 2019, I think, was when that happened. So pre-COVID, but only just.
Yeah.
Now, Jason, were you in that integrator role? Let me ask you first, how long have you been running on EOS and in that journey?
So we've been on the EOS journey for about 10 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm an evangelist. I believe in EOS to my core. I came to it through Grow Florida and CEO Nexus and their CEO Roundtable program. So the CEO Roundtable runs basically using a lot of the terminology and style of traction. And I was influenced to read it. I was influenced to start to run my meetings more like the L10s. I was given directives to do some of these exercises. And I was a bit, skeptical at first, right? Every week, if you're If you're paying attention to business development, and you see them on the back of my shelf there, right? There's a new book that comes out. This is the magic bullet, and it's going to help you, get to that next level, scale to 10x, right? And everybody's got a claim. And so I didn't jump head first. And I read the book, but I stopped reading the book, and I read the book, and I stopped reading the book. And as I would read the book, I would think about the individuals here. And at the time, there were many more people here who were here based upon loyalty more than merit. That's what I walked into. The business was already mature when I walked into it. And there were a number of people here who had been here for a long time for those reasons as opposed to their abilities, quite frankly. And so as I'm reading the book, I felt a lot of the roadblocks that I would encounter. And I always forget the name of the other book that is the story version of EOS.
Get a Grip.
So at one point, Ray Watson, who ran the group for me, the CEO group, said, read Get a Grip and see what that does for you. And as I'm reading it, I felt exactly everything I was experiencing here. And at a certain point, I was all in, and I decided to just start to do the implementation ourselves. We decided we were just going to try and do some of this ourselves. And as I started it, I hadn't quite finished the book, but I was getting it was like, as I was flipping the page, I was like, that, and then that would happen tomorrow, the next day, right? That's kind of how the book lays out as you try to unroll these things in the organization. So we definitely had some difficulties getting it rolling. And through that group, I was referred to Chris White. And Chris White is a very powerful, dynamic implementer who has been a coach and a mentor for me ever since then, and has been a pivotal part in helping us really stay the course with EOS and traction. And, we've matured to a point where we don't really need him for our quarterly offsites, but we will bring him in 1 or 2 times a year just to have that outside influence and just to have what he brings to the table, which is a lot, and having a third party really helps to be objective, because it's very easy to get lost in your interpersonal and cultural issues in an organization.
Yeah, I find it very beneficial to have that implementer. And they play 3 or 4 different roles, right? It starts with teaching. They're a teacher at first and helping you learn all the tools and how to be able to utilize what doesn't seem like very complex at first. Like you said, Jason, when you read Traction, you look at it, you go, yeah, I've been through school, I've worked at a couple of different companies. This is not rocket science, if you will. But the implementation, holding firm to it, is the first part of it. So you go through your first couple of days up front, you start getting into teaching mode, and then they quickly shift into facilitator mode and trying to draw out as many of the skeletons, if you will, things that need to happen. And at least based on my experience, what I've seen with leadership teams and, sitting on leadership teams in that sales and marketing seat, what I've noticed is in the infancy in that first year, you go through a little bit of changes, specifically in that room. It's all at that tier
It
one
was almost
leadership
a
level.
50 to 75% of the individuals and or leaders that were on that team were gone.
And sometimes you just have to hold firm to that actual recipe, right? It's and when EOS doesn't work, it's usually probably two-pronged. It's either folks look at it as a guideline and say, yeah, we can get to this, but I don't want to roll this out. I want to keep it at this level, or these are good ideas, but maybe I'll get to it later on. And there's not it's almost like you're lukewarm.
Yeah.
The second scenario that doesn't work is when the CEO has not bought in. Whoever is in that visionary seat is still looking at it as, well, I want to bring this in because I think it's really going to help the organization, but it's for everybody else, it's not for me. And those are the 2 places that I've noticed leadership teams have a very hard time grasping and holding firm to that structure. So yeah, it starts with that leadership team turns over, then you start with building, developing, planning, and that role really does adjust quite a bit. How long did you work with, I know you said that you still work with him to a degree now. How many years did it take you guys to really get this down to an art where you could do it on your own?
So Cory, you came in what year? Well, when did you become integrator? Because I think that was really, for me, the point where it became second nature to the organization, which was what year?
Yeah, I think probably 2019. So I think we worked with Chris from 2016 to 2019 directly, and that's when he kind of turned to us as a leadership team and said, "You guys got it." He's like, "You guys have what you need. You have the tools. You know what you're doing." He's like, "In my book, you guys are graduated, and if you want me to keep coming around, I'm happy to. If you want to, do it yourselves, I think you're capable. And, we all agreed we liked having him around. So like Jay said, we still bring him in once or twice a year just to have his presence and his guidance. But we've been running it kind of ourselves since 2019.
Now, Cory, are you involved in any other peer groups, organizations like Vistage or Strategic Coach, anything like that you're part of as well?
Yeah, so Jay mentioned CEO Nexus. They have a group specifically for COO roles, integrator roles for number two in the organizations. Basically, those people that don't fit into that perfect, CEO role. A lot of, I guess, CEOs said, I would like my number two, or I'd like my head of ops to have a group of their own. And so that's what I joined and I'm a part of.
Tell me a little bit more about that group. One, I 100% agree. There's various different roles in organizations that need to have peer groups because there are things you can do. It's tough to manage up and down and still go to your boss with certain items or to your downline. But it's really good sometimes to have a peer group that you can bounce ideas off of strategy and really build your network outside of that particular organization. So I've seen some groups go to key individuals. So number two, CEO group, and then they've started getting down to key groups and a little bit further in the organization to help with that leadership. Tell me a little bit about CEO Nexus and how it's helped you, and how long have you been there for?
Sure. So, I've been with them whenever he started that kind of operators group, probably it had to have been post COVID because we were already remote when I started. So probably sometime 2020 would be my guess. It's a group across different industries. In fact, Steve, the gentleman who runs it, makes a point of not having competitor, organizations within the same group. And it is a safe place that, we can talk openly about the struggles going on in the business, people who report to us. We can talk openly about our visionaries and what a pain they can be sometimes and struggles of that within an organization. And it is a safe and open place like that. And, we have people that are like, we have a woman who is part of a staffing agency. She's phenomenal. Every month, a different people issue comes up that again we can all kind of talk experience and walk through what we've been through and have an individual who has a lot of experience on the professional side of that give us guidance. We have people that are in organizations that are just now getting to having technology systems like an ERP system and they're looking for guidance and me being in the role I'm in, I can say, hey, we transitioned to this ERP system, these couple years ago. Here's what to look out for. Here's what you want to set up as far as a testing group. So it really is just a lot of brain power in one group of people that are actively doing a job, I guess is the best way. And the biggest benefit of it is these are people who are in the trenches. They're doing the work day to day. These aren't, people who are just talking to consultants that aren't living it, breathing it day to day. They're other operators, and that's really helpful to have. And I haven't found anything quite like it anywhere else. So,
And
Well
really,
said.
the directive to the group is that you're speaking from experience. So you're really not contributing upon opinion, unless you're asked. So people will bring their issues just like we do with our standard L10. They bring their issues to the group. The point to the group is to get into the meat of the issues and see how the other people on that team can help with that issue and to speak from experience. So it feels good. And I've really, I had one group initially that broke up and I didn't think I was going to get back involved. And very quickly, an issue came up, and I thought to myself, well, who do I turn to now? I don't have my brain trust. And I got right back into another group that I've been with now for probably 6 or 7 years, same group of people. And you really come to rely on it. It's an excellent resource.
Now, is this organization, I'm not as familiar with CEO Nexus, is it regionalized there? Is it a national
Well,
organization?
Steve Quello started this organization out of Orlando area, right? It's Orlando. And there's a lot of overlap with, he actually has groups out in Wisconsin and
Minnesota.
oh, it's Minnesota. You're right, Minnesota. And so it's kind of there's a few that happen down here in South Florida, but it's really primarily focused in Central Florida. Uh, and yeah, that's how he's organized.
So let's shift gears here a little bit. Jason, you're in the visionary seat right now, correct?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that it's a transition, and it has been a transition. My father still is involved in the business. He more is a spitfire of ideas that both Cory and I have to figure out how to implement, right? And many times it does take the extra layer of me to help with some of those because there's enough happening on a day-to-day basis that Cory's working on that need to be executed quickly. And then there are other higher level ideas that are, 6 months, a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 years off that if I were to pass off to Cory would keep him from getting the job done every day. So, I still straddle both of those positions, but I do spearhead a number of what, we might consider visionary ideas with new operations, new technologies, new ideas. So, yeah, we sit in a couple of those seats, quite frankly.
So tell me about the when you guys first implemented EOS. Obviously, you're the younger guy coming in, read the book, thought this was a great process, structure, accountability to bring into Boca Bearings. How was the transition and your father adopting this? And I'm presuming he was in the visionary seat, and you were in that integrator seat when you first adopted this.
Yeah. I mean, my DNA is integrator. I am a process person. I am a systems person. When I really read the book and grasped the book, I got it, clicked. These were all the things I needed to be able to bring to the organization. It was, at that point, like the book would kind of describe to you, the business was like a constant fire drill, right? And sometime I'd go home at night and I would be pulling my hair, belaboring things and not sleeping, and not knowing what was happening and not having visibility into all the departments. And once I read that book, I really saw how that could change. And so as I described it to to him and to others in the business, he got it. He understood it. Others in the organization did not. And those people are no longer here. And once we really got it rolling and we also use a particular piece of software called 90.io, which I swear by. It's another thing that I would evangelize only because again it lets me sleep at night. It gives me full visibility into the business, into every department, into every measurable that we've decided is a key performance indicator, into every role and what we've decided are their true responsibilities, into everything that is measured for those individuals and their quarterly reviews and our major issues and how many issues are those teams and departments dealing with. So having that visibility real and a place where I can go and look at it any time of the day or night. And I don't have to go ask somebody or find somebody or talk to anybody. I can go see it. And that was transformative for us. So it was received well and thankfully it's gone well.
Well, 10 years, you're one of the early adopters. There's a lot of companies that have adopted EOS in the last, say, 2, 3, 4 years,
Sure.
for good reason. But they've done a fantastic job marketing. They've done a fantastic
Yeah.
job of adoption. Their conferences are great. But I'll spend a minute or two, give a little bit of a plug to 90.io. I know you mentioned it. With what I do, I can give you a little bit of an overview being a fractional CRO and working with multiple clients. 90 has been a fantastic tool, not just for EOS-based companies. What I use 90 for is, I've got a multi-tenant version of it. So any of my clients that are running on EOS, I have their instance there. All of the work that I do is listed in there. I'll take rocks specifically with them. I'll have my to-dos. And so it helps hold me accountable so the client can do that. But also in my case with the downline being sitting in that sales and marketing head seat, the people, I know you mentioned it a little bit earlier, the people that don't buy in, don't understand EOS are the first ones to go, basically because they don't want to be held accountable to anything. I think that's the big item of, EOS has three elements, right? Process, structure, accountability, amongst other things. But the ones that don't want to be held accountable, it's like, I'll get this done. All right, when? For what reason? Give me more. And once those questions get asked and you push somebody into make a commitment, that's when it falls off. So 90 for me has been great in not just the clients that are running on EOS and I have their instance already and they have their leadership one and I have my sales one. I've gone ahead, I've got a multi-tenant version of it just for me, but I do it and I do my sales L10 meetings all in 90. So I've got clients that are in construction or in other industries where I go, okay, we have the 5 KPIs. Even if you can't go into 90, you know exactly what our meeting is going to be like every week. We're going to run it in this format and I'll plug in the information on your KPIs. But it is fantastic tool. I mean, whether you're running on EOS or not, If there's structure in your meetings, 90's great, and I couldn't live without it. So I'm glad you brought that up. Are you guys using any other tools that the EOS ecosystem has you guys like? I know there's a couple of tools like Trainual or Whale or
You just
anything
gave
else
me
that
a
helps you
couple
with
things
yours?
that we'll go look into. So
Yeah, Trainual is a good one too. It's there's a couple of tools out there that are if you and for the two of you guys being high fact finders and much more process oriented, it's hey, we have a process. I think we documented it, but I just don't have it in a good repository. And a tool like Trainual, Playbook Builder, and a couple of others are tools I've used and had a chance to utilize with clients that just gives you the repository and someone can get access. You can track if they watch the like if you record a small video, which is a welcome to the company and onboarding of an employee. All of that goes into Trainual as a process. And then you can also monitor, did somebody actually watch the video? Did they actually go through the document? And if it doesn't work out, you've got a really easy tool to go back and say, hey, I asked you to read traction, you didn't do that. I asked you to go through all of these steps, you didn't do that. I'm thinking to myself, this isn't going to work out.
we like those tools, so we're going to look into that one.
Yeah, I think you'll like Trainual. Let me go back to you guys are both high fact finders, it sounds like to me, both process oriented. I'm presuming there's a lot of fact finding. And be honest with me, have there been times where you guys are overanalyzing something and what happens when there's too much? And I've seen it before. I've had two partners in a business. They're both really high fact finders, and there's times where, and on the other end, I'm, on the Colby, I'm a quick start, right? If I've got 75% of the info, I'm a go, and we'll figure it out as it progresses, as a sales guy would do. Tell me a little bit about that dynamic, and maybe Cory, we'll start with you, especially coming in behind Jason.
So yes, I would say we're definitely both high fact finders. And so I think where we run into issues more often is because we naturally are willing to look at more information, want more information, we will say yes to trying to get more information and put off making decisions. And then if we just take a step back, and this is something I've learned in the last couple of years, especially dealing with Alan, Jason's father, is asking the hypothetical before we go off and send, a data person on, 2 days worth of work to find some numbers or some report. And I'd stop and ask, if we find out X, are we going to do something different than if we find out Y? Like, is this actually going to affect our decision making, or do we just want to kind of know this because it's going to make us feel good, but we're going to make the same decision no matter what? And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes you want to validate your thinking with data, and that is important. But other times you're just kind of pushing, you're kicking the can down the road. You're pushing off the decision because, of course, we want to find more information. So that's where I think we can fall into a trap. And because we've recognized it in the last few years, I think we've gotten better.
Jason, you want to pick up on that?
I mean, I think the reason that Cory and I work so well together and appreciate each other is because we do work very similarly, and so I point to it as all the reasons why we've been successful. There are a number of projects that we've probably been working on for years because we wanted to control it in a way and weren't willing to let other people sort of work on that. Now, that's not the general thing that we do, but we have some specific ones, that maybe could have gotten done quicker, but they wouldn't have been done the way we wanted them. So there are some of those. I think that we hold on to a few of those, but in general, I think we're both very much also task oriented and get things done and appreciate people who want to get things done and not hold it up for perfection. We want it to get completed and move on to the next thing. Always a series of things that work together. So if they don't finish that, we're sitting and waiting on this thing here. So I think it's been a very successful relationship. I think, my personal feeling, I'm no expert, is the whole visionary integrator thing is a spectrum. I think that it's the season of your life, it's the season of the condition or situation that you're in that brings those characteristics up or down. I see my father very much being a fact finder sometimes and process oriented and other times being more visionary. And I feel that I do that. I feel like Cory does that. Not necessarily before, and Cory may say the same thing, before traction, I may not have consciously or verbally said, I'm an integrator or I'm an operations person. I know I'm capable of executing, getting things done, knowing how to get something done and getting it done. So when it happened and I was called on to do this thing, it felt natural. But when I'm called on to do this other thing, it also feels natural as long as I have somebody like Cory who can take all that other stuff off my plate and I'm not necessarily worrying about it. These other qualities can rise. That's my
Well, um, there's components there. Well, I was thinking earlier, I said you're also a bit of a unicorn, Jason, in another element, which is a lot of times somebody that's probably more wired from an integrator standpoint, it happens less often than not, is the integrator also being in that sales and marketing seat. And not just executing on it, but you'll notice that even in reporting structure in a lot of companies, at least that I've observed, even though the integrator has a majority of the people reporting to them and the integrator reports up to the visionary, in a lot of companies, if there's a vacancy in that sales and marketing seat, I'd like to say probably 90+% of the time, it ends up being the visionary that occupies that seat. And there's a lot of times where between the integrator and sales and marketing is the area that's like it's two different worlds, right? It's operations, and I'm the person that fixes what you guys break over here. Tell me a little bit about that dynamic, and I'd like to kind of shift it over a little more into your sales organization, how you've built that out, and I know in a previous conversation, Jason, you talked about this great growth during the pandemic and then post-pandemic and how you've been able to sustain or find a way to sustain the employee count and the growth of the organization and stabilize that. So I know a lot of questions, but give me a little detail from there.
I mean, with respect to the last thing you commented on, again, we really point to traction. We are data focused. So it took us a long time to get there. Our first version of the executive team KPI, Cory, must have been, I don't know, it was easily twice as big as it is now, if not more.
Yeah, 30 plus measurables on just the executive
Wow.
scorecard.
Because it was, hey, put it in. Hey, put it in. Let's look at it. Does it? And then let's just see. Is it actually telling us something? Is that, and we would do it from quarter to quarter. Okay, well, we've been looking at that number. You see all the history. What did it tell you, and what actions did you take based upon it? And Chris and Cory worked really hard to really trim that down. And after it was trimmed down, again, we always are kind of playing with it a little bit, but we really feel like we have a handle on what numbers tell us what's happening and to respond to them quickly. So as the business grew in a way that was an unnatural growth, 25%, where typically we're operating in a 7 to 9% growth. And all of a sudden, we had this expansion that we didn't really have to add people onto. We didn't have to expand our warehouse staff. We didn't have to really expand our sales staff, although we did add some. We didn't have to really, we didn't have to grow the organization by 25%. We knew that it was temporary. We knew that these customers couldn't consume that way. They were panic buying. And everybody in the industry, in many industries, suffered the same thing, where everyone was worried about the supply chain. They were worried about what was the future was going to look like in the pandemic, and they were just stocking up for a rainy day. Well, at a certain point, when COVID stopped, everybody was sitting with easily 2+ years of inventory on their shelf that they couldn't consume. And so we felt that pretty quickly. And we responded in the organization pretty quickly, overhead wise, expense wise, focus wise, how we were going to spend our future dollars. And we were capable of shifting in a way that allowed us to maintain our profitability in the face of declining revenues, and allowed us to we didn't have to go and let go a whole bunch of people, and we didn't have to go and make drastic changes because we were on top of those numbers ahead of time. So it was very gradual for us. And I don't know if Cory wants to comment on any of that at all. But
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't feel good. I guess I'll take a half step back too with just EOS and COVID in general. We as an organization didn't miss a beat when COVID happened, and we across the board as an organization would all point to EOS. The fact that we still had the L10s as, that cadence that we could all rely on, that within those L10s, the focus is solving issues. It's not on just reporting whatever you want to report that day or just giving a quick status update on, what you're doing every day. It allowed us to stay focused as an organization. And so we got through that. Like Jay said, our company that experiences single digit growth or decline year over year. One year you're up and having a great year at, a 9% growth. The next year you're flat or down 1 or 2%. And, over the years, obviously everything's moving in the upward trajectory, and that's what we want and hope. And then COVID happens and we're experiencing 25, 30% growth in a year and a half span. And so, yeah, that is wild to experience. And, obviously we still did grow and we still invested in things, but as we then saw the decline happening, and it doesn't feel good. If you see it plus 25% up, that means at some point we're going to see minus 20 or 25% down. So, psychologically, that was hard for us for the last year or two to go through. But organizationally, operationally, we were able to, like Jay said, we didn't have to suddenly let, a quarter of our staff go. We didn't have to suddenly pull up stakes on dramatic projects. We scaled back, we're still being responsible. When the dollars are there, you make investments. When the dollars aren't there, you're more conservative. But, organizationally, we really weathered it pretty well. And we're now at a point that we all kind of feel we finally stabilized,
Timely that we're talking about this. So I had a former guest probably a couple of months ago that was on the podcast, a great company I work with called American Surgical. And they're going through an interesting dynamic similar. So Jason and Cory, they run on EOS, very involved with Vistage. And the integrator, he was actually sitting in both the visionary and integrator seat, and then he kind of moved over to more of the visionary, but it's still very much wired like an integrator. But the reason I bring that up, they're going through something similar, and I'd love to give them some credence. So they manufacture their own product. They manufacture in the U.S. They're one of their two or three primary competitors in this medical devices neurosurgical space is having a huge issue with manufacturing and can't get product to market. So they've got clients that are purchasing from them, and they've got prospects that haven't purchased that now are forced into a scenario they're going to start seeing, and they've already started seeing unbelievable growth. Last month was our biggest month in the history of the business. It's been around for 18 years, and it's probably going to continue for a little while longer. My estimate and forecasting is probably for the rest of the year. And it is a repeat business, so you're hoping that once they get comfortable with purchasing from you and your process and your proven process and the service levels that you provide, they stay on. But I guess the challenging part, and you talked about it, is forecasting and realizing how long that's going to go for. And then if you overproduce and you get to that tipping point, what do you do at that point? So I know you guys have kind of experienced it and learned from it. Anything that we haven't talked about that are learnings there that you'd have as feedback to somebody that's going through that unbelievable growth, and which is great. I mean, as a sales guy, obviously I'm celebrating it every day, so don't worry about it, just keep producing. But there's also an element of it's going to regulate back down to natural levels.
I mean, if we go back to the key performance indicators, we have certain numbers that we try to maintain parity with. And, there are future orders and there are orders on the books, and there are how much we've committed in terms of product that we're going to have to pay for when it comes in. And when those two things get out of line with each other, it's a big red flag for us. And so we have a number of numbers like that we've created relationships between that tell us you need to make some decisions to get ahead of that. And we usually have, because of the nature of our business, when we make a purchase, it could really be anywhere from 90 to 180 days plus before that product hits our dock. And because of the payment terms we have with our suppliers, it's going to be another 30, 60 days after that point before we have to pay that bill in full. So we have a buffer that we can make decisions, and it'll start having an effect 90 days out, 180 days out. So we have this window because of how we're purchasing, how we're replenishing inventory, how we're creating new inventory and products for the shelf. That lets us do that. So it's really about knowing your numbers. And the only way to do it is, quite frankly, in my opinion, how we did it, which is to track everything and then see what's actually showing you something over time.
I know you've got operations in Asia Pacific and other areas. Did that help? I mean, during that period of growth, even though you didn't have to add very much headcount, did you end up having any contract resources or partial temporary resources to help you during that growth, or were you already built well for that 25-30% growth at the time?
I feel like we were built. Cory, what do you think?
Yeah, we're built, and this maybe comes to, my philosophy on business, which is, I think, and I'm an operations guy, so this is going to sound a little counterintuitive. If you're looking to optimize to 100% everything you do, then anything that happens on top of that means you're over capacity. And I like to think in terms of people and their time. The average person, I don't believe, and this is, again, personal philosophy, I don't think the average person who's an employee should be at 100% capacity all the time, because something's going to come up, somebody's going to get sick, somebody's going to have a family emergency. And you have to make space for that in your organization and as a person, that manages people. And so our operation, we were not at 100%, when the growth started. And so they could, work a little bit extra, do that work. And again, 25% increase in business didn't mean a 100% equivalent 25% increase in effort needed. If we're shipping on average 100 orders a day, now we're shipping 110 orders a day, but those orders are bigger than they typically were. That's not changing the overall workforce or the hours required to do that as dramatically as the dollars would indicate. So I guess those kind of two different answers that kind of hit the same thing, which is, not operating your people at the red line all the time, trying to eke out that last bit of profitability or that last bit of effort from them. And that gives you that room for growth and contraction. And then the inverse happens, the business slows down. We'll have some projects on the back burner, focus on inventory or a backlog on processing things when you have more downtime, and have those things ready. You obviously you don't want people just sitting idle all day. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, how we weathered some of that.
Well said. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to come back to something towards the end here, and we'll wrap up with, you mentioned employees and working at Boca Bearings, so I'll come back to that in a moment. I'd love to get your feedback on it. But let's spend a couple of minutes, if we can, on your sales structure. Obviously, the podcast Executive Edge, but my area of expertise and work is more in sales. I know you've had folks that have helped you in the past. Tell me a little bit, if you can, about your current sales structure, how you manage that, maybe KPIs, and the support you've got. I believe, Jason, you had mentioned a gentleman you work with currently that does work like I do. So if you guys could give me a little bit of detail on that relationship and the KPIs and the work on the sales side.
Sure. So we've traveled a fair bit of distance between, even the last 20 years. And as an organization, we sell to three distinct markets. We sell to what you would consider to be a retail audience, somebody who literally is sitting with a skateboard, a bicycle, a motorcycle, and a fishing reel, something of that nature, and they're buying one or two or three bearings, and they're putting it into their thing either just to replace something that broke or to improve it because they're competing, they're performance racing, they're bass fishing for dollars, whatever it is. They're looking to increase performance. That's a retail audience. Then we sell to that's a small portion of our business, probably about 15%. And then the next portion of the business that we sell to is bearing distribution, that market that's all over the world. All over the country, that has a handful of these distributors in each market, and they're not stocking the type of stuff we are. When they need it, they call us, we have it on the shelf, we ship it out. The other end of our business is what we would consider to be industrial end user, OEM, R&D business. So what happened is over the years, we tried to all of those markets, to the retail guy. And the retail guy a lot of times even looked like the hobby shop, the fishing distributor dealer, the motorcycle repair shop, the bicycle repair shop. We tried selling to the distributor, and we tried selling to the industrial end user. And the truth is that you can really only sell to one of those segments. The retail consumer end and the distributor is marketing. You can't call them and influence a sale. They are really driven by demand in that moment. When they have the demand, they'll call you if they know about you and understand what you offer. And there's no point in calling them and trying to penetrate further, or calling them and trying to make them a pitch on a product line that they have zero relationship to. With industrial end users, when we come to applications and environments and conditions that we understand, a lot easier to make those calls, to pursue those customers, to penetrate those accounts further. And so it took us a number of years to kind of figure that out. Michael Wills, who's part of Sales Accelerator, which so are you, correct?
Yes,
You're part of
correct.
the same group, is a fractional sales manager. And there are a lot of things I really appreciate about a fractional sales manager. The things I appreciate about a sales manager who's fractional is that he doesn't have the time to get involved in the dramatic personal situations that salespeople like to create when they're either new or trying to develop business that they're not successful at, or the things they want to point to that are the problems external to them that can really bog down a sales manager. A sales manager who's there every single day, who's ready to sit in the cubicle with you to hold your hand through certain doesn't really get the other things done for me that I wanted to get done, which was building out a CRM, developing workflows, creating the right processes and measurables, doing role play, getting the individuals on the team to step up their selling techniques and characteristics, because they're bogged down in process, they're bogged down in relationships, they're bogged down environmental or economic. The fractional guy doesn't have the time to do that. And so he's more likely to hire people that don't need that. They're more likely to weed those people out who do need that. And they're more likely, because they know that we have a particular focus, they're more likely to deliver on those things and not worry about the other things. It's a double-edged sword, but those are the things I appreciate about a fractional person. So we have done that, and over the last number of years, we have built those tools and we have developed those things, and we do those role plays, and we're getting the team to participate in those things. And so I think that maybe I've gone round the bend, but that's what I like about the team we've built and the way we've developed it. And we're always building it, and people are kind of coming and going, and we're still at that point where we're deciding how big we really need that team to be. At the moment, we sit pretty comfortably with how many we have, which is a small team. It's not a very large one.
Cory, since you're in the integrator role, and it might be Jason, what are the KPIs that you feel are effective that you're holding the sales team accountable to that is part of the scorecards there?
So, and this is a lesson learned through COVID, when business is good, when sales are good, sales wants to be judged on the sale. They want to be judged on that final number. When business is down, they're like, well, it's the economic conditions. It's not us, it's the economic conditions. And so then how are you supposed to measure them if it's only the economic conditions that are a factor in? So we've settled on, I think, kind of a happy middle ground, which is no matter how good or bad business is, we want a baseline of activity happening. We've determined that to be, X number of calls. Within those calls, we want X number of, conversations, calls that are a minimum of 60 to 90 seconds or longer. I don't know the exact measurables on that. And then from those, a certain number of quotes issued and things like that. But with so many things, with any activity, if you try and measure activity, it's easy to game the system in a way. If you tell somebody, hey, I want you to make 200 calls as opposed to 100 calls, they're going to find ways to just make a bunch of dials. And again, are those effective conversations? Are those effective calls they're making? But ultimately, it's number of calls and emails and conversations had, number of quotes issued. And then when it comes to then bonus and compensation, we then talk about, the results on the actual sales number at the end and things like that.
So it sounds like it's all activity based, and there's a couple of points I wanted to make and see if I can add to it. It's very similar to how I would measure salespeople. I think you look at the funnel and you say, all right, you start a KPI, at least in my opinion, the way you start a KPI is what's the end result you want them to accomplish. Sales is black and white. It's very clear. You're either selling or you're not selling. And if I give you a quota of 50,000 and that's the optimal goal, that's going to be a clear one. That's the bottom of your KPI. Then from there, it's what are you trying to accomplish to get there? So to get 50,000 in revenue, you got to do proposals, right? So how many proposals do you have to generate to be able to get there, and what's your close ratio? Then you work your way up, right? So the funnel's kind of this way. You work your way upwards. And the one that you're right, and it's interesting you mentioned that, Cory, the KPI that salespeople believe that they're playing with, and it's not really easy to track. And no matter how great your CRM is, that activity component is going to be a little bit of self-reporting, right? It's LinkedIn, it's cell phones, it's emails, and you can integrate your CRM to be able to capture a lot of that. But at the end of the day, if you're a salesperson and you're relying on your salary only, you're probably in the wrong role. Variable compensation is why you're doing that role. And if you want to do less activity and get less appointments and get less at-bats, less proposals, you're going to get less revenue, which means less money for you to take it home. So that one component, that KPI at the top, as important as it is, it's tough to track. And, you tell salespeople, this is what I want you to do. And kind of pivoting over to the fractional world, Jason, and you articulated that really well. What I notice is as a full-time manager, whenever I've been in full-time seats, you're held to a number so closely that times, I think because you hired these folks, you feel so compelled to actually do the selling for them. And the sales manager goes into, hey, let me help you push this deal over the finish line. And eventually you're doing a lot of that. You end up being the end of the sales process rather than building a repeatable sales structure and saying, all right, I'm hiring professionals that know how to sell. Let me give them the playbook and the elements and removing obstacles, how to be able to negotiate deals and where the parameters are, and let you execute. And that's why, from a fractional standpoint, Michael, myself, and the 190 plus people that do what we do through sales acceleration gives us the opportunity to come in with a plethora of experience, but really look at the model and say, this is not rocket science. We just have to hire people that can execute on this and have the right messaging, the right demeanor, and be able to execute from there. So if you
And
come to me and you have a
that's the hard
KPI of
part.
120, sorry, that is the hard part. And that's where there are times where I tell people exactly what we do at Sales Acceleration is EOS runs it across the organization, structure, accountability, process all the way across. We build that specifically in sales. And when we do it in sales, it's one of the trickier places. I had an integrator for a client today I was speaking to that said, I don't know how you do what you do, Raffi, because I can't deal with salespeople all day. And it's kludgy to him because he's a process-oriented guy. He's in the finance seat. And he looks at it, he goes, well, I know what somebody has to produce and how they get there, and I can hold them to these components. And sales does have some ebbs and flows, right? You've got activity basis. You've got networking events that you should be at. How do you quantify that? At the end of the day, sales is so much like sports. It's black and white. You either are winning at the end of the day or you're not. You lost the game 2-1. You missed your quota by 50%. It's clear as day. Everybody can see your scorecard. And hopefully we're holding people accountable to that number moving backwards rather than, it was a tough year and I tried really hard. Okay, I appreciate that, but at the end of the day, there's a seat that you're filling and there's a compensation associated with it. We have to quantify for that. Last item I want to pivot to and have you guys both go through your element. Cory, you talked about being at the company for 11 years and your great trajectory. If you're speaking to an audience right now and somebody is interviewing with you or you're trying to sell them on why to work at Boca Bearings, why somebody come to work there and what do you value in employees and attracting new employees?
Sure. So I guess I would start as us would probably want with, Boca Bearings core values. We have three and they're pretty simple. We have radical customer service. You have to be willing to help the customer no matter what. If a salesperson is on vacation, we don't say, sorry, customer, I can't talk to you. You're not my client. We say, hey, so and so is out on vacation, but let me help you out here, so that we can make sure your needs are fulfilled when they need to. So you have to be willing to set aside your personal ambitions and personal goals to help the organization and help the customer. Through that, team player is part of our core values as well. That's our other core value. That's number 2. Again, being able to work across the organization to deliver that radical customer service. If finance says, hey, I'm not able to reach their accounts payable department and there's a hold on that account, I'm going to work with the sales team to get in contact with the right person so that we can make sure we're able to get paid as an organization, but then we're able to help that customer and get that customer their order as quickly as possible. And finally, continuous improvement. You have to be willing to improve as an individual because that's part of what we do as an organization. We do not sit back and just say, whatever happens today happens today. We're proactive. We've gone through the EOS route, worked with new technologies. We're working with new technologies now. And part of our product itself, this ceramic hybrid, this full ceramic, these specialty materials, part of the product itself is about improving performance on something, improving results. So you have to be able to be, focused on the customer with radical customer service, be a team player, and be willing to grow through continuous improvement. So those are the things that kind of drive the organization. And if those resonate with I think Boca Bearings would resonate with you.
Well said. I like that a lot. Tell me about the average tenure of your employees. You got 25 full-time employees. You've been there 11 years. What's the average tenure and why is it at the level it's at?
So that definitely depends on the role. One of the few downsides is because we're a smaller organization, at some point certain roles become capped, specifically in, sales. There's only so much room to grow within an organization, but we have warehouse guys who have been at the company for 16, 20, 30 years in one case. The longest running person who's a member of the sales team has been at the organization since year 2. He's one of the other part owners and he heads up the distribution focus selling. The whole leadership team, the newest person on the leadership team has been at the organization 6 or 7 years. So again, that's not to say we don't have turnover. We certainly have some new people in customer support and sales, but I mean, on average, we're looking at least, 7 to 10 years for a lot of employees.
In this day and age, those are unbelievable numbers. And it's on both sides, right? We see it. It's employee loyalty is what we can point to, but there are a lot of companies that we're not showing loyalty to the employee either. So the employee has to show loyalty to the company and vice versa. And we're in an environment right now where there has been layoffs, there has been elements where people have been displaced, 2 years, 3 years into a job, and I think it's created an environment where there's probably more job changes, and tenure at organizations is not anywhere near where it was probably years ago. Jason, probably at the time where you got into this organization. Why do you think that is? Why, Jason, let me have you get the last word here as to why do people stay at Boca Bearings? And
I mean, the thing I like to say, I mean, Cory said all those right things, right? But the thing I like to say about Boca Bearings and the people who are successful here is that if you have an insatiable curiosity about technology, a lot of times for technology's sake, you're really going to be successful here. We speak to a lot of different customers, do a lot of different things that sometimes can sound like perpetual motion and other times can sound like life-saving medical devices. When you talk to one of those customers, if you are genuinely curious and genuinely interested, it really makes a difference at your day to day. It makes what we do really exciting. Bearings can actually be pretty boring, but how people use these bearings, the things that they're building and the things they're trying to accomplish, and our niche, which is things that are high temperature, high speed, pushing the envelope of technology, really makes it a fascinating place to be. And for many, many years, and just recently, we just put a pause on it just to reconfigure it. But for many years, we've had a partnership with FAU Engineering. And on any given day, you could come into our operation and go into the warehouse and see somebody welding, soldering, 3D printing, woodworking, building electric powered go-karts, making their own pinball machine, developing their own visual, I forget the thing that the Marine guys were doing, where it was like a vision operating system, where it was, detecting things with the camera. So we work with their human powered submarine department. We work with a lot of their marine engineering, and they develop very cool things there. And those kids come here and have a job where they get to develop these projects. To take a break from your day and be able to go into the warehouse and talk to these guys and see what they're working on and why they're working on it and what they're building just makes it more engaging and more exciting. So I think that culture is something that a lot of us really appreciate and do on our own. A lot of us have our own 3D printers or have our own hobbies that are, electrically engineered, focused, and that's the kind of organization we are. So those are the people that do well here.
well said. That's great closing. I know when I connected with you, Jason, this has been great. I really have enjoyed the conversation with both of you. When we originally connected, it was interesting. There's a lot of synergies. One, I knew that you're running on EOS, which, again, I'm a huge fan of. We run our business on EOS. I run all my sales teams on EOS. So that was the first connection. I believe actually the outreach was through my assistant that got a hold of your father, who then connected me to you. Then getting on with you and finding out that you're also using sales acceleration and Michael Wills, which is another area of synergy. Really enjoyed that. And then hearing more and more about some of the peer groups that you're a part of and how you value employees and grow in the organization. This was great. I really enjoyed it. I want to thank Jason, Cory for jumping on. Thank you for getting on. I really enjoyed having you here.
Thanks for having us.